the degree to which we did not see that Republican establishment say, hold on, time out, that's not acceptable, that's not who we are, but rather be cowed into accepting it, and then finally culminating in January 6th, where what originally was, oh, don't worry, this isn't going anywhere, we're just letting Trump and others vent. And then suddenly you now have large portions of an elected Congress going along with the falsehood that there were problems with the election.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East. The GOP's descent into lies and madness led us to the deadly insurrection on January 6th. And as the president was speaking about there, that party's capitulation has seemed to flourish since then. Yet outside of Washington, brand new reporting in today's New York Times reveals a very different response. Republicans there looking at attacks on our democracy through a wholly different lens, focusing on holding those responsible to account. How novel. From that new report, we learned of another riot that took place shortly before January 6th at Oregon State Capitol in Salem. It was part of a wave of protests all across the country, triggered by the ex-president's lies about fraud. The siege on Oregon's Capitol is described like this in today's Times, quote, in December, a restive crowd have breached the exterior doors and battled law enforcement officers in a building that is capped by a gold leaf pioneer wielding an axe. The agitators, waving Trump flags and clad in body armor, wielded pepper spray and smashed windows. Arrest Kate Brown, the crowd chanted, referring to the state's Democratic governor. Sound familiar yet? But what's striking is how that state's GOP lawmakers are now handling the event. The New York Times continues, quote, on Monday, the state's House Republican caucus signed a letter encouraging the resignation of a colleague, Representative Mike Neerman, who in a newly discovered video appeared to be coaching protesters on how they might gain access to the building. The House Republican leader, Christine Drazan, said on Tuesday that she believed there was enough support in her caucus to expel Mr. Neerman from the state legislature if he did not resign. Republicans in Oregon, you see, not shying away from putting state and country over party. It is a stark contrast from the downplaying of January 6th and the obstruction to a commission we still see among the GOP on Capitol Hill. January 6th is the day that Republicans must reckon with, though, writes former Congresswoman Barbara Comstock in a new op-ed about how her party must right now stop fearing Donald Trump. Quote, Republicans, instead of opposing a commission to investigate the events of January 6th, need to be at the forefront of seeking answers on the insurrection and diminishing the power of QAnon and the other conspiracy theories Trump fueled. Republicans need to have more faith in their policies and stop being afraid of a dangerous and diminished man who has divided the country and now divides our party. Reconsider the commission, let the investigation go ahead, and run and win in 2022 on the truth. The truth. A feature obviously lacking in the former guy's baseless claim that he will be reinstated as president in August. His new polling shows a majority of Americans see right through his dangerous delusion. A Politico Morning Consult poll survey finds the ex-president's claim is dismissed by a majority of Americans, including 61% of Republicans. And the Trumpian wing of the Republican Party was dealt a blow last night in New Jersey when the moderate candidate, who back in 2015 called Trump a charlatan, defeated the former president's loyalists in the GOP primary for governor. New York Times reports it this way, quote, the Republican primary was seen as a test of the potency of Trump's combative brand of politics among New Jersey's party faithful. And the public discourse often touched on themes from the former president's divisive term, the politics of mask wearing and the legitimacy of President Biden's win. New signs the Republican Party may want to turn the page from Donald Trump is where we start this hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. We're joined by two Republicans who represented the state of Virginia in Congress, the aforementioned Barbara Comstock and Denver Riggleman. Also joining us, Washington Post senior Washington correspondent and MSNBC political analyst Phil Rucker. Barbara Comstock, in Oregon, Republicans did exactly what you have been advising Washington Republicans to do. They took the violence seriously. They took the attack on their state capitol seriously. And they're purging from their caucus not Liz Cheney. They're purging someone who aided the insurrectionists. You have the absolute mirror image out of Kevin McCarthy as Republican leader in the House. How do you pierce through what now seems so locked in and rigid as fealty to the big lie?
Well, in Oregon, you had those videos and you had evidence. So I think the Democrats just need to start putting whatever committee they have that can issue subpoenas. The committee that I used to be chief counsel on, the Government Reform Committee, can send out subpoenas just about on anything. So that committee or others that have subpoena authority should be sending subpoena requests to people like Mark Meadows, Trump Jr., Ivanka, all those people who were in the tent on January 6th, all the people who were planning those meetings at the White House on what they were going to do on January 6th. Why was Roger Stone here in town? What was he doing? You can get text, phone records, all the documents, hotel records, and start putting that together. And that is going to tell a story, and that won't be partisan because it'll be factual. It'll be their own text. And we know just from the day, January 6th, remember when Chris Christie went on ABC News because he couldn't reach the White House or get anyone to say, Mr. President, you got to do something here. You got to call off the dogs. We know Kevin McCarthy called too, but there must have been dozens of others. And what was the response from the White House when they got those? I think it'll be fascinating to get it, as well as the planning of those meetings. So Democrats need to do this yesterday. I do not understand why I would have been subpoenaing those records January 7th, and then you'd be able to move the way Oregon did.
Deborah, the Democrats' position has been that the domestic violent extremism threat comes from millions of Americans who don't believe in the legitimacy of President Biden. And my understanding of the speaker's position has been to do everything possible to have a bipartisan commission like the one negotiated by Kevin McCarthy's deputy, Congressman Katko, so that it would bestow upon it legitimacy. That is not going to happen. To Barbara's point about the evidence that needs to begin being collected, let me read about what she says about following the money, because these are unanswered questions that these are answerable. These are not like known unknowns. Barbara writes, who planned and funded the Trump rally that day? And who picked the speakers and got attendees there? How did supporters of QAnon, Oath Keepers, and the Proud Boys get there? What happened as the White House planned for January 6th? There are emails. There were emails sent to supporters. There were venues booked. There were permits taken out. All that evidence has to exist. What do you think about where we are in terms of not turning over many stones?
Well, I think it's sort of ridiculous that we can't have a commission right now. And I just want to, give a shout out to Barbara. She's the OG when it comes to anti-Trump and going against ridiculousness. And Barbara and I have talked about this. She was in the Government Reform Committee. She knows this process. And we talked about her unleashing those subpoenas. And with my background in call chaining, social network analysis, and pattern of life, actually utilizing that data, those CDRs or call detail records and other forms of communication to identify what this social network looked like, who was working with who, what the communication paths were, right, and who the leaders were for each one of the movements or each one of the cells that were there. I think this is a fact-based or data-based thing that we need to do. And I do believe that there's going to be committees with jurisdiction that are going to start to step up. I've been talking to a few of them myself. I can't talk about it too much right now, but I believe the committees do need to step up. They need to identify these individuals. And I want to say something about Barbara and what she wrote also. Here in Virginia, we didn't see what we saw in New Jersey. Virginia yesterday had the elections here. I don't know if you were aware of the off-year elections that were going on in Virginia yesterday, but most of the individuals in the Republican Party that won were pro-Trump or Stop the Steal. Barbara and I commiserated over that also. And also when you look at the New Jersey race, that individual did go to a Stop the Steal rally or meeting also. So I think those are some of the issues we have to address, is that this is baked in. Some of this is baked in. And what Barbara's referring to in her op-ed, or what she's talking about, is Barbara going on the offensive, because we have to tell people that you don't have to be afraid of President Trump. Conservative values don't have to equal crazy. That's why I appreciate Barbara for the years she's been doing this. But her op-ed really was an offensive move here in Virginia to ensure that we can actually get in front of some of this.
Deborah, will you help Democrats? Would you offer your time? Would you volunteer to help them where your expertise lies?
Helping Democrats right now is helping the country. This isn't a partisan issue. That's what I get so angry about, is that we had individuals that sieged the Capitol based completely on fantasy. And I apologize if the connection is not that great. We have awful storms coming through here right now. So if you hear thunder, it's not me, Nicole. OK, but I think right now we all have to help. And This is not partisan at all. Barbara's so right on this. This is about facts and data, about going after the individuals that are responsible for this. So I don't see it as Democrats reaching out to me. I see it as Americans reaching out to me for help in identifying who these people are. And I hope I can use my 20 years of experience and maybe rely on some of Barbara's experience to get through this.